think you're good to go.
Okay, thank you, Barry. Good morning, everyone. This is Superintendent Darryl McCall from the Wachusett Regional School District. Thank you very much for joining us for our second day in a row of a town hall, basically around the reopening and how the process is currently progressing. Hopefully we can give you some more details today. I can tell you that we continue to have questions streaming in. So again, as those questions come in, we have a data bank that we're collecting, and Director Keenan is organizing questions, and we're putting those together in terms of responses. Today, with me during this presentation will be our Administrator of Special Education, Christine Smith, our Deputy Superintendent, Bob Berlow, our Director of SEL and Guidance, Brendan Keenan, and our Director of IT, Barry Sklar. So I'd like to welcome them all and thank them for participating again today. So again, this is our second town hall in 2 days. Yesterday, I think we were able to cover a great deal of information. Some of it toward the end of the slideshow was rushed a little bit because we were kind of compressed in terms of our time. So we'll try to ensure that we have enough time at the end of our hour and a half today to get maybe into a little more detail around some of those slides toward the end of the presentation yesterday. So if you sat through it yesterday, some of this will be repetitive in terms of the information that was kind of run through in a quick manner. In terms of, go ahead, Bob.
I'm sure that you want to let people know that we spent a lot of time answering new questions for today as well. So it's not just, we're not just redoing yesterday. Is that true?
Yes, it is. So if you were to watch yesterday's presentation, you will see that there are some slides that are the same, but probably 90% of this presentation is new questions, new responses. And again, we really appreciate all of the questions that are coming our way. And it really runs the gamut from, hey, how's remote going to work, to what's going to happen in terms of traveling through the hallways in certain schools. So again, some of that information will be dealt with at a 40,000 foot level. Other parts of it we can be a little more detailed with. So without that, without any more being said, what I'm going to do now, and as part of Google, we have a screen share option. So I'm going to share my screen with all of you. And we will be able to see the presentation that we are currently doing. And give me 2 seconds because it doesn't always go quickly. Okay, Bob and Chris, are we set?
Yes, we can see it, Darryl.
Excellent. Okay.
It's that, Darryl.
Thank you.
So you want to pop it into the present mode, Darryl.
I'm sorry.
Put it in the present mode on the screen.
Thank you. How's that?
That's perfect. That's perfect.
Thank you. So again, this is our second town hall question and answer forum. And thank you all for joining. So again, we just made a few welcoming remarks. The rest of the time is going to be spent going through many of the questions and responding to them as best we can right now at this time. Again, what we've done is that we've tried to break our questions down into groups. So by chunking them into these different areas, we're trying to make this a little easier for people to ultimately find out a response to a question that might have been posed. So when we have our questions and our website updated with this information, each chunk will be broken down. And under teaching and learning, for example, all the questions associated with teaching and learning will be listed with responses, the same with health and safety. So the 6 areas that we've divided this up into are teaching and learning, health and safety, COVID-19 guidelines, technology, routines, and logistics. So again, we felt as though that worked out well. I had some good responses in terms of people appreciating the breakdown and how it is set up in terms of the presentation. So again, I appreciate that. So under teaching and learning, let's go through this a little bit. And Deputy Berleau, I know Bob, if you can start talking through some of these questions.
Sure. I'll read the questions, Daryl, and then you guys can give some answers here. So the first question is, my child receives special education services. When hybrid begins, will my child be able to participate in 4 or 5 days of in-person classes?
Okay, so we've had quite a few questions about how special education is going to work in terms of hybrid versus remote versus a strict in-person. And Christine is here today to talk through that a little bit. So Chris, do you want to go ahead and respond?
Sure. So all students throughout the district will be assigned as cohort A or cohort B. Our phase 1 students that are currently in our building will continue to come to school either for the 4.5 days a week or for 4 days a week, depending on their program. And then in terms of the inclusion support, it's really going to be dependent upon the availability of seats in each cohort. So again, a student will be assigned to a cohort, let's say, for example, cohort A, and let's say they go to inclusion for ELA class. They will definitely go to inclusion for ELA class when they are in cohort A in session. However, if they happen to be a student that is still in the building on the other days, and there is room in that classroom, in that inclusion classroom, and it makes good educational sense for the student to be in that classroom, then we will have the student participate in inclusion. However, if the student is remote for those days, they would still get an opportunity to participate in the remote aspect of that cohort. So if it's cohort A and they're in person, they would get a seat in the inclusion classroom on Mondays and Tuesdays. And then on Thursdays and Fridays, we're looking at individual availability in a classroom, or we're looking at what is the best plan for a student. It may be the best plan for the student to be in the home and doing the remote online work, or there may be availability to be in the classroom, and that may be the best option. So it's really going down to the very individual level of each individual child, and then that information is being communicated to parents on the parent engagement form through the special education parent engagement plan. So each parent should know that information about their student as the cohorts get assigned and as teams and individual buildings really start to analyze the availability in the classrooms.
Great, Chris. And again, I think just to reiterate, this will happen via, if you're a school-based family that has a child that's in a school-based program, that'll happen through the school. If it's a district-based one, again, and correct me if I'm wrong, Chris, you would be contacted by the team chair no matter what.
Yeah, well, each parent is going to continue to get an update on their parent engagement special education form. And so in most cases, that is coming directly from the child's liaison, whether they are in a district-wide program or receiving special education services in their home school.
Excellent. Okay, great. Thank you.
How about the next slide? There we go, Daryl. So some questions here, and there's a series of them coming up. When we sign up or opt out of the hybrid learning program, will this decision be in effect from November 18th to the end of the year? And I guess we're a little confused. It seems like we're going to change, or is this we're going to stay hybrid for the rest of the year? And then the second question is, if hybrid extends to the end of the year, can we opt into it or opt out of it at any time?
So that's a question that's come up quite often, and one of the things we're looking at in terms of moving toward a hybrid model is really the constraints that are still placed upon us in terms of bringing all of our students back in full. So at this time, there is, we've really not had any indication from DESE, the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, or from Governor Baker's office in reference to when true in-person learning could occur in terms of school looking like it did back in March of this year. And that really comes down to the constraints placed upon schools on social distancing, as well as the constraints placed upon busing and transportation. So if those were to be lifted, this would be a different story, but we're really anticipating that the hybrid learning plan would be the one that would be followed for the remainder of the year. In terms of students or families deciding on whether or not they want hybrid or remote, and whether or not they could change that part of it, they definitely have the opportunity to do that. That's something that we would, we're offering up for families. If there is a decision made where they feel like remote's not working or hybrid's not working, then want to switch over, that will definitely be allowed. The only issue that we would want to make people aware of is that it's going to take a little bit of time as we have to assess space, especially if we're moving from remote to hybrid, assess the space associated with transportation and also with social distancing within specific classrooms.
Thank you. Our next question, it deals with hybrid. And if my student's in hybrid and they're sick, what's that look like? What happens then? Are they still required to get online even if they're sick? What if they're home and they're having to quarantine for 14 days? Can they get online? Is that allowed?
Yeah, so this is, again, this is another question. As we look at a typical year, when a student is sick, they might get a parent might send an email to a younger student, or a student at the middle school or high school level might be able to go to a website and see the assignment that's been posted. But this is a little different because everybody's home now. If a child's sick and they can still participate, we'll be able to do that. We'll definitely allow that to happen. If there's a possible quarantine issue associated with COVID exposure, we'd still want them to be able to participate remotely. Again, if the child is sick, and either COVID, pneumonia, strep throat, whatever it might be, and they're sick, they do not have to participate in the same way that they don't if they're sick during a typical year. And again, what will happen in those cases, in the same way that it used to, teachers will work directly with families around supporting those students and catching them up through various means. But again, what we want to do is really ensure that if a child is sick and they're not feeling great and they need to rest, we would much rather have them rest, recuperate, and then be able to come back into the fray in terms of either being hybrid or remote and really participate in their learning fully.
And Daryl, I think parents would need to know also that ultimately the teachers are the ones who are going to work directly with you to make sure this happens. They understand that this is a unique situation and it's trying times for everybody.
Yeah, good point, Bob.
Daryl, if we pick hybrid, how's the district being certain that we're going to keep the same teachers? I mean, is that really going to happen? And then have teachers been asked if they're going to continue to work or if they might take a leave?
Yeah, so in terms of the hybrid model, really the plan and the goal is that for students who are currently, as they're all remote, students who choose to be hybrid or participate in the hybrid model will remain with their current teachers. One of the issues that we're looking at is that if a teacher takes leave, and that's short-term leave or long-term leave, it could be the remainder of the year for something, we would obviously have to switch that classroom teacher out with someone else. And in terms of our remote only, so we're really in the midst of finalizing, what that might look like and who the staff are going to be ultimately. In terms of our leave requests associated with teachers, our HR department director, Jeff Carlson, is actually reaching out to building principals and to staff right now who have actually put in for a variety of requests, and we're assessing those right now. And that should be defined, much better by the end of this week.
Thank you. Can you address the loss of instructional time that as we move from fully remote to that we're in now to hybrid? It seems everybody might lose valuable instructional time when we move to this model. At this point, consistency and stability have been developed with students while we're remote, and there's also been a rapport developed with teachers.
Yeah, so when again, there are benefits and drawbacks of each model that is out there. And after speaking with superintendents from across the state who've already moved into they might have started the year in a hybrid model, or they've transitioned a little earlier than we have. Again, there are benefits and drawbacks of every model. In terms of the hybrid model, the opportunity for students to be in class, and I spoke about this yesterday, to be in class with their peers, with their teacher, face-to-face, socially distanced, it's invaluable. You can't replace that through a Google Meet classroom. So that's really the goal of what we're trying to do here with hybrid. The 2 days on are on. You'll have a Wednesday that's a remote day that combines both groups, and then you'll have that Thursday, Friday. If it's an A group, your Thursday, Friday would be remote. And again, that remote will look similar to some of the remote that's going on now, in the sense that students aren't online with their teacher doing synchronous learning the entire time. There are breaks. There are times when students go off and they do their own assignments and they come back on. So there will be that goes on those days. It's just going to be more focused on asynchronous versus straight synchronous. There will definitely be the opportunities for synchronous learning on those cohort days where students are remote, but the primary details associated with how students will be interacting will be based upon an asynchronous model.
And I think parents also need to hear that as a school district, we have two big goals, and one is absolutely academics, but the other one, which is kind of maybe not mentioned as often, is the whole socialization part and developing those skills in students. And it's really challenging to have students develop those while we're remote. Therefore, having the students in person, that absolutely lets us really work on those as maybe a top priority when students are in person, versus the academics, which might become a secondary priority when they're in person. When they're remote, maybe those two things get reversed, but that's really what we're looking to be able to access and enhance when we have students in front of us in person.
Exactly, Bob. The aspects that you cannot replace the in-person opportunities that present themselves when teachers are able to work with students in person. It is, when we're thinking about our social emotional learning, that we're attempting to, ensure that students feel safe and secure and are emotionally sound. It's a challenge to do it remotely, and having those students in front of you will really pay dividends in the long run. And as you said, Bob, one of the things we're going to do is continue to focus on that during that in-person time. So more of the academic time can also be spent on the other items that don't necessarily involve the in-person modality.
Thank you. Well put. The next question, a shorter question, not as many words on this next one here.
I know.
I'll wait for you to move down for us there. There we go. So will there be live teaching on half-day Wednesdays? You mentioned yesterday that students are in for Monday, Tuesday, and then they're off for Thursday, Friday, or vice versa, but Wednesday, everybody's off. So what's happening on Wednesdays, Daryl?
Yeah, so Wednesdays are going to be a day when cohorts A and B are together for remote learning. What will happen is they will basically be in a situation just like they are right now, where they will check into their class in the morning. They're going to meet with their teacher. There will be some synchronous learning going on. There will be some asynchronous learning going on, but it will be a time when both groups get together and have the opportunity to work with one another, meet with the teacher, go through some assignments, talk about some other things that are going on. Maybe, and again, the teacher can do some pre-teaching associated with the next 2 days. The teacher could also do something where they compress some of the subject areas so they're a little shorter and they're covering a little bit more. So again, that's really going to be dependent upon the grade level subject area that the teachers teach. But it's going to be a time when there is still synchronous learning occurring.
Thank you. Daryl, any consideration have we as a district given to maybe looking at the high school differently than K to 8?
Yeah, so that's, in terms of the high school is unique. Our high school is one of the largest high schools in the state. And in a typical year, we have over 2,000 students. There are over 150 teachers. So it's a big high school. And because we're a big high school, we're able to offer a large number of courses, AP courses, specialized courses for our juniors and seniors. And we want to be able to ensure that we can support them as best we can if they choose a remote model. So we're continuing to look at how we can continue to offer those courses and really make it work for students. And when we're talking about some of those classes, we're talking about courses that are basically only running 1 or 2 sections up at the high school, and that includes some of the electives. For the most part, most courses you're seeing 3, 4, 5, maybe even more courses that are offered, but there are some one-offs and two-offs that we have to be really cognizant of and look at as we move through this.
Thank you. And speaking of remote only, we got a couple questions here I want to throw at you dealing just with remote only. So if high school students choose remote only, it appears they may be taught by some online teachers or be enrolled in an online program. So maybe you can address that. And also, how will grades be handled if we are using any online teachers?
Yeah, sure. And this is something that we've been looking at over the past several months in terms of the options for these students. So if a student decides to take on that remote only path, they want to be remote only for the year. A couple different options are in play. One would be having the teacher they're currently with continue to be their teacher. Another one is they would be still in the course but taught by a WRSD teacher. And the third option, as you mentioned, Bob, is an online teacher from outside WRSD, and that would specifically be an online course offered through something such as Virtual High School or Edgenuity or another online platform. In reference to the grading, the transcript, or whatever it is, ultimately anything associated with even an online teacher, the grades are part of a student's transcript in the same way that they would be if they are in a classroom with a WRHS teacher.
Thank you, Daryl. Continuing on in that vein of maybe keeping the high school in mind here, for classes where there's only one teacher that you mentioned early, will remote students be able to continue in these classes? Will these teachers be required to teach both hybrid and remote students at the same time? Will students be guaranteed that they're going to have a WRSD teacher? And you've maybe answered some of that. And the last one is, will AP and honors level classes be available to remote students? And will these be taught by WRSD teachers?
Yeah, so this, I answered a little bit of this in the previous question, but when we're looking at what we have in reference to the number of students coming in, we still need to know ultimately how many students we have taking part in the remote only pathway. That will help us really define, okay, we have enough of a cohort of students here to be able to have a teacher actually support this in some form or fashion. If not, that's when we have to look at the concept of an online course, virtual high school, whatever it might be, in order to provide that direct support to that student, as we might not have a core group that's large enough to actually support it. Ultimately for AP classes, we really want to make sure that those are available for our remote only students. And again, what people have to understand is if they're available for us through an online course, we are going to go that route as well. Because again, we want to continue to offer those up for students no matter what happens in terms of hybrid, remote, or full in person.
Thank you, Daryl. So Daryl, this is a question maybe about teachers and what are we doing with teachers here as a district, or what are we telling them they have to do? So are teachers being provided with the flexibility and support that they need to run their classrooms as they see fit? In other words, they're being told to teach in a particular way.
So again, what we've done over the past 2 to 3 months now is that we've had the opportunity to have the teachers in for 10 days prior to school starting, which was a benefit for I think everyone, just to start getting them trained on some of the new software online learning management programs that we have in place, knowing that they were going to be full remote, at least for the first quarter. What we're ultimately doing, principals aren't mandating that any teachers adopt a certain instructional practice, a specific instructional practice. But we're really, we want to ensure that teachers are using the technology to help support kids in the remote model, and ultimately as we move toward hybrid. So, for example, Seesaw is used in K2, Google Classroom is for 312, and the expectation is they're really utilizing that. And we want to make sure that they are utilizing many of the other tools that are out there in order to help support students' learning. And that is either in person, it could be online, remote, but in any manner possible. But we're not mandating that it has to happen one way or the other, in the same way that we don't when we have teachers teaching live in person with kids. We don't say this is exactly how the instruction has to happen. We talk about where they need to be. So it's really backwards design. That endpoint is the power standard. What's that objective? How you get there, I think, is really a matter of who you are as an educator. But ultimately, in this, with the current situation that we're in, we want to ensure that we're using every modality possible to help kids learn.
And I think really leveraging teachers' strengths is what's important during this time. And we are also providing teachers with a variety of PD offerings throughout the years to try to enhance, and so that they can try new things as well.
Exactly.
Thank you, Daryl. So health and safety. What's our first question under health and safety?
Let's see.
Daryl, can you please help me as a parent in the community to understand how it was decided to have hybrid high school students attend only 2 days per week? It seems that this decision was made solely by the inability to safely distance at lunch.
So, as I said earlier, our high school is a large school. We have typically over 2,000 students attend. So even if you cut that in half and you take off some students who might attend remote, you're still talking about 900 students who are in that school, plus 150 teachers, plus another 50 to 75 support staff at least. So there are still a lot of people in the building. In reference to lunch, and as we kind of move forward with looking at all of our schools, the high school in particular typically has a lunch where there are 500 students having lunch at a time at tables. They're packed in, and I appreciate Principal Biendo and the other administrators who do that duty 4 times a day. Our issue is with the socially distanced desks that are currently in place that we would use for study halls. We can basically only fit about 130 students into the cafeteria at a time. We then have to break off other classes, use the black box theater and other places that are also already being used, because we still have spaces at the high school that are too small to use for classes. So we're expanding into some of the other spaces that we have available to us. In order for us to have had lunch, it would have been over hours in order for it to occur safely. And we just did not feel as though it would put anyone in a situation where their schedule would really be able to work properly. For that reason, we're looking at that model of a 7:30, 11:30 time frame for in-person, and then an afternoon time frame where students, it's not, it's a half day in person, but the afternoon is still going to be that full remote expectation in the same way that it is right now.
Thank you. Our next question has to do with COVID cases in the district and schools. When do we close schools? What's the trigger point here? And if we are going to close a school, how many weeks? And is there a guideline from DESE to help us out here?
Yeah, so as most people are probably aware, the state came up with a metric, a map, a COVID-19 map of communities that has been shared with school superintendents, with school districts, with the communities since probably mid to late August. In reference to the color coding that accompanies that map, it goes from gray-white, which is basically no worries at all, to a red, which is There are 4 levels: red, yellow, green. I'm sorry, white, green, yellow, red. Red being the most extreme and one where people should really take caution around COVID. The state numbers are increasing across the Commonwealth. We're seeing that happen from the east over and also a little bit over on the western side of the state. And as we talk about being in one particular color as a community, DESE has said to all school districts that we should not move from one mode of learning to the other on 1 week or 2 weeks worth of data associated with the COVID cases. Really, it should be based upon at least 3 weeks worth of data. So even if a community is red for 2 weeks, they might not move to, and they're hybrid, they might not move back to remote at that time because they might wait another week or two to see whether or not the case numbers drop and the infection rates are lower and students and staff can safely remain in school. In reference to our community, our 5 towns, as a regional district, the state designated the largest town in each regional district as the town from which we would base our decision upon. So Holden, which comprises basically 50% of the district, is the community that we look at. And we still look at the 4 other towns as well. They're just, they basically make up 50% of the rest of the district. And right now, Holden's yellow. There will be, they just postponed when this information is shared. It's typically shared on Wednesday evenings. It's now going to be shared on Thursdays because they've changed some of the designations. But when that information is in, that's when we assess it. I also meet with our local boards of health bi-weekly. We talk through case numbers in each community, and that's been extremely helpful. In terms of what we're looking at to move from one space or hybrid to remote, a different learning path. We just want to ensure that we're doing so with using data and data points that really show one way or the other the projection of COVID-19.
Thank you, Daryl. Daryl, this question deals with mask breaks. So could you give us a little bit more details around mask breaks? Specifically, when do these happen? How long are they going to be? Are they inside or outside? If they're outside, what happens in cold weather? If they're inside, is that even safe?
Yeah, so mask breaks, I think, are important for anyone that might be working in a office setting, someplace else. You have your mask with you at all time. Unless you're working in an office and you're closed off, you're wearing your mask for the day. And I do know that it's not easy always wearing a mask. So, with that being said, we want to ensure that kids have the opportunity to take a mask break during the day. So as we look at our elementary schools, our middle schools, and our high school, each school has its own way of working through mask breaks depending upon grade level. And at the middle school and the high school is really based upon where they're at in terms of their time frame. When we're thinking of the example that we have here is around a school, let's just say it's Glenwood, where they have pods and there are 6 classrooms that surround that pod. Well, what would happen is they would have a schedule that the principal puts together that basically has those kids from one grade level on that pod coming out, taking their mask break where they're socially distanced, and then coming back in. That would happen when it's raining or during the winter. If they could go outside, they would mix that together with their recess. So mask break and recess would overlap a little bit. That way we're giving kids the opportunity to just, take it off, let them breathe a little bit easier, and then, ultimately have to go back into school. So each one will be a little different. We're still in the midst of, making sure that those kids have that opportunity. In terms of the number of students, one thing that people have to remember is we're not talking about 25 students in a classroom. We're talking about 12, 13, 10, 8. There aren't going to be many more than that because we're cutting classes in half. So with that, in mind, in order to socially distance them in those larger spaces, it's much easier for us to do that.
Thank you, Daryl. Daryl, our next question deals with HVAC, heating, ventilation, and air conditioning. So what filtration and ventilation improvements have been made since the pandemic began?
So this is one that Bob is intimately involved with, and I am as well, in terms of just the amount of I guess time and energy that has been put into this, over the past 6 months. So a district that has well over 1.3 million square feet of building space and one HVAC person, we've really put ourselves in a situation where we had to start early with this, get through all of our classrooms, make sure our dampers are open, make sure our motors are running, make sure the belts are tight enough. Any place where we have systems that needed to be updated, that needed to be replaced, that is currently what is still occurring. We do have some systems that we're completing, one in Paxton, Central Tree as well, where again, those systems are such that we want to ensure that there's the most airflow possible per hour. And one of the things that you'll see in here, it's the air exchange per hour. That's the rate at which the air actually changes out in a space. So when we're looking at that, that's something that we've actually had an outside air quality company come in and take a look, take samples of spaces throughout all 13 schools to assess the air quality in terms of the air exchange per hour. All of our ventilation systems, all of our HVAC systems have MERV 8 filters. And ultimately those all get changed. We don't leave the same filters in. So that's something that happens anyway. And we've just wanted to ensure that continues to happen on a regular basis. We will get a report back from ATC, which is a company that's done a assessment of our buildings. That should be in next week. They are a group of industrial hygienists that do this across the Commonwealth. And we're hoping that once that information's in, we'll be able to take any issues associated with any of the spaces, any of the HVAC systems, and rectify that pretty quickly, and then be able to move forward.
And maybe just so people could understand, 3 to 5 air exchanges per hour is what we've been told is the range you should shoot for. Internally, our own WRSD goal has been 6 or more air exchanges per hour. So that's what we've been shooting for as we work on these different systems. Thank you, Daryl.
Yeah, thank you, Bob.
So Daryl, given the fact that the COVID case count, it seems to be rising right now, with predictions of it returning to and maybe even surpassing the highest infection rates we saw last spring, is this being taken into consideration before we move ahead with the hybrid model?
Yeah, it definitely is. I stated this yesterday. We are continually watching the numbers, speaking with boards of health, making sure that any type of outbreak that is currently happening in one of our 5 communities we know of, and we can understand whether or not there's going to have to be some contact tracing associated with our students or staff. Anytime we would make a decision about moving one direction or the other, we would make sure that we would assess the metrics associated with where we are as a community, and ultimately where the state is. As people probably heard, Boston yesterday made the decision to remain remote, and their rates are much higher than anything in central Massachusetts right now, but that is moving west slowly but surely. So we're keeping a close eye on it. We'll not put anyone into a situation where we feel as though we're endangering their health. So again, it's something that is, right now, if we were to look at it today, we're still good to go. I'm feeling secure about our numbers and the safety protocols in place. And we will continue to watch this and monitor it every single day, and ultimately every week.
Thank you. Daryl, we got a lot of questions overnight. Even though we answered this yesterday, and it's the same question generally, we had a lot of follow-up questions around this. So maybe you could go through this again. What happens if my child is sick at school?
Yeah, so again, one of the things that we want to make sure that people understand is that as we look at this process of bringing kids back into the school, the first line of defense is really at home. So ensuring that if your child has a fever, a cough, is not feeling well, any of the symptoms associated with COVID-19, that you're proactively keeping them home for the day. It is something that will help us, as we move forward. We're always concerned about kids coming to school when they're ill. We're even more concerned now because of the possibility of there being a spread that happens, where not that you're in a super spreading situation because we're socially distancing and we're masking, but the possibility of or probability associated with COVID being transferred from one student to another. And, again, we're trying everything in our power. We're attempting to make sure that we're providing a really safe environment. So it starts at home. When students come in and if they show symptoms, that symptomology will be assessed by a classroom, ultimately a classroom teacher will take a look at it, but the nurse will be the one to make a decision about what the next steps are. If the nurse feels as though the student really has symptoms associated with COVID-19, she'll don her protective gear, walk the student to the COVID-19 medical waiting room, and every school has a medical waiting room. There that student will be monitored by an adult. And what will happen is we will be looking for families to basically come and pick up their child and probably go get them assessed. Ultimately, this is something that we need to be very proactive about in our nursing group, and Director Keenan, who works with them, they've been fantastic about reviewing protocols, getting those out to families, and making sure that we're in a situation where we're providing the safest environment for students possible. In terms of some of the information that we want to ensure that we have, nurses really need to have any up-to-date emergency phone numbers. That is super important. I know when I was a former principal, there were times when numbers just didn't get updated, and when numbers don't get updated, it makes it impossible to try to get a hold of a family member. So we want to ensure that happens. And again, one of the main reasons why is because we also don't want a student sitting in an isolation room, the medical waiting room, for 2 hours waiting for someone to come pick them up.
Thank you, Daryl. So the first question under our COVID-19 guidelines here, and once again, this was one that we received some overnight feedback on, and we figured we'll best serve to revisit it today. When would I be notified, and how will I be notified if a staff member or student at my child's school is sick?
So again, this was one where we did have a few more questions about in reference to how the information is disseminated to parents, to staff, anyone out there. So, basically what happens is building administrators, as well as Director Keenan, myself, school nurses, they work directly with the boards of health and families and staff, and any COVID cases that are proven positive. That information is shared based upon what can be shared associated with ADA and confidentiality. So I can tell you that the nursing team here has, they're part of our Board of Health meetings every 2 weeks, and they've been fantastic about asking questions, about making connections with the boards of health. And I can also tell you that each Board of Health from every town has been very receptive to us asking questions, and they've also been very supportive in terms of then maybe, if we had a question about something, they'd actually reach out to the state and ask for clarification if there were questions that they've been answered, but or asked, but really difficult to make a decision locally on. So that's basically where we're at in terms of how it would work. On the next slide,
there you go.
It's kind of a notification guideline for which you could follow. So when would a district notify my family about a COVID-19 case? So to the left-hand side, no notification if a member of your school community is symptomatic or at home, or is a close contact of a confirmed case or test negative for COVID-19. So you wouldn't get notified if that would be the case. So, and that's basically I've got a cough, I'm not feeling well, I'm staying home. If you're a parent, you're not going to hear about that from us, based upon it being a student or a staff member. The same would happen if I were a staff member and my wife had COVID. You would not hear that, Superintendent McCall's wife has COVID, so just wanted to let you know. Or that I took a COVID test because I wasn't feeling great and came back negative. That information would not be shared with families. It would be shared with families. And so a member of your school community tests positive, then if you or your child is identified as a close contact, you would receive a letter. And students and staff in that building only will receive notification that someone in their school community tested positive, and the individual who tested positive is not identified, and that information is not shared at all. And that goes back to the protective rights associated with that. And then families and staff will also be notified in the event that there's a multi-building or community spread. And again, that's something that we always need to be careful of in a regional school district, because you have communities that are all feeding into the high school. And, again, maybe we have a case or two at Thomas Prince, but, those kids also have a brother or sister who attend the high school. So we would want to ensure that we're contact tracing from Thomas Prince to the high school, transportation, the seats, the entire ball of wax. So, ultimately, this is one of the things we're putting out there so people know this is when you're not going to get any notification. If these things happen, this is when you will be notified about, a case.
Brendan, could you help us out maybe a little bit more with that one?
Sure. Just want to add to that, that I think implied in this, what we just discussed with the nurses and with this notification, confidentiality and privacy is so important, and that's been a big part of our discussions with the boards of health and also with nurses. So identifying information would not be included, and we'd actually be very careful about anything that could be identifiable in that messaging. So that's very important through all of it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brendan.
Daryl, how about the next one here? And this also has, I believe, a table that goes with it. When can a school community member return to school?
So, and again, a school community member is a staff member. It's a student. So if a member who has close contact tests positive, they may return to school after 10 days of isolation if they've gone for 24 hours without a fever, and that's without taking fever-reducing medication, and have experienced improvement in their symptoms. So, for example, their cough has gotten better, and they've received clearance from public health staff in terms of contact tracers, so basically the local board of health. And if you look at this chart, I had a chance to briefly review this yesterday, but this is really a breakdown that Director Keenan put together. And when might you return to school? So if you have symptoms and test positive for COVID-19, 10 days of isolation, you can return when your symptoms have improved and you're fever-free for at least 24 hours. If you a close contact test positive for COVID-19, you must quarantine for 14 days after that exposure, even if you test negative, because again, there's a time prior to symptoms showing up when it could be in your system. So we want to ensure, and this is something that's directly from the CDC around the quarantine time, we want to ensure that those that symptomology eventually, if it's going to happen, it's going to happen, and you're not going to put other people in a position where they may end up getting sick as well. COVID-19 symptoms diagnosed as alternative diagnosis. So if a provider has documented an alternative diagnosis, the student or staff may return based upon the recommendations of the provider, so your local doctor. COVID-19 symptoms and negative COVID test results. So the person may return when the symptoms have improved and it's 24 hours without fever-reducing medication. And again, that's when you might have a fever, but it's not COVID related. Again, we do not want you coming back to school, and this is how we have it typically all the time, if you have had a fever within 24 hours. And then COVID-19 symptoms but not tested. So they may return to school 10 days after the start if symptoms have improved, and they're fever-free for 24 hours without any medication. So again, our local boards of health, they're the ones that will help and lead in directive responses when there's any positive case in our schools, and they're very strict about following all DPH guidelines to the T. So again, we're in very good hands with all 5 boards, and I personally appreciate the assistance that they've provided to us thus far.
Thank you, Daryl. Daryl, our next question, we mentioned this yesterday, and maybe it caught some people like by surprise, and we had a lot of follow-up questions about this, so maybe you could go through this again. What is the protocol if we as a family travel out of state, especially with Thanksgiving on the horizon here?
Yeah, this is one that I think not everyone has maybe thought through completely in terms of travel, because again, you think Thanksgiving, okay, I'm going to drive to see my relatives in Rhode Island, or I'm going to go to New York, or whatever it is. In terms of the process for this, Massachusetts has pretty structured, rigid protocols for any travel from states that are considered at-risk states, or when you as a person that lives in Massachusetts travel out. So all visitors entering Massachusetts, including, this is wording directly from mass.gov, including returning residents who do not meet an exemption, are required to complete the Massachusetts travel form prior to coming back, unless you're visiting from a lower risk state designated by DPH, and I'll show you those in a minute. Quarantine for 14 days, or produce a negative COVID-19 test result that has been administered up to 72 hours prior to your arrival in Massachusetts. So it's really having it done, and then being able to show that you're okay to go when you're here. And then if your COVID-19 test result has not been received prior to arrival, visitors and residents must quarantine until they receive a negative test result. So if you take that test in New York and you drive back home Sunday night after you've taken the test, but the results aren't until Tuesday, you have to quarantine. And they, again, failure to comply may result in a $500 fine. That's not a district fine. That's something that is will be done by the state. And you know what? It looks like we don't have the map in there, but ultimately there were only.
It's in there, Daryl. Brent added it. I think yours, just because you're presenting it, needs to be refreshed, but let's not worry.
Don't worry. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Essentially what it shows is there's 2 states on the West Coast and a few up here in New England and New York, and those are the only states that people could come back and not have to worry about quarantining from or taking a test.
Right.
Any other state, basically, you got to take the test.
And again, Rhode Island, out of the 6 New England states, Rhode Island's the only state that's considered a high-risk state. And as you said, Bob, New Jersey and New York are 2 states that where you don't have to worry about this.
Yep. So technology, Daryl. Where do I get support or technology help from?
Yeah. So again, thank you to our tech support staff. They've been working diligently over the past, since we went remote in late March, and I have to tell you, they've gone above and beyond in so many different ways in terms of supporting staff and supporting families. So students K-12 who need a device, and this is still now. So if you have a student at home and your desktop breaks and you don't have access to, or your student doesn't have access to remote learning, contact us at wsc.net. Follow the instructions there, and then you can request to borrow a Chromebook, and that will get set up through your school. Families without internet access, again, this can happen regularly in our 5 towns. We do have hotspots that we purchase via the grant that we can give to families in order for them to access the internet for one of their devices. Tech help is always available for really specific tech problems that you might have, or an issue that someone might have in reference to their own technology, their computer software that they're dealing with. And again, there's a form right here that you'll have a link to. And then families can learn how to use any of the tools through our Technology Help Center, and that's updated regularly. So what's nice about this slide is that all of these links are hyperlinked, so we will have this posted, and you can actually go back in and click the link and go directly to the form, the instructions, or the Help Center.
Thank you, Daryl. Daryl, if my student is remote and is being taught by a teacher from a different school in the district, will my students still have access to the online programs they're using right now?
Yeah. So, oh, and you know what, Bob? I apologize. I think I jumped up a little bit. Can you please, if my student is remote and is being taught, is that the same one?
1 second there, Daryl. Yeah, here's the remote one. If my student is remote and is being taught by a teacher, do you have that one? It's right there.
Yep.
There you go. That's
Yeah.
the one we're talking about.
So if a student, and again, if a student chooses a remote-only path, they'll continue to use the same online learning platforms, which we use K2 at Seesaw. With Seesaw and Google Classroom is 3 through 12. They'll have access to the online learning programs in the district, such as Lexia. And these programs were purchased, several weeks ago, using the COVID relief grant funds that were shared with us by the state and ultimately the federal government. And those are going to be available for students both who participate in hybrid learning, as well as those students who participate in remote learning. And there are several different, including Lexia and Bob. I think there were a couple of other ones that went along with this that are also available.
Yep. Do you want me to mention some of those, or are we
Oh,
good?
yeah, sure. Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, we have Lexia, Daryl. We have programs such as Star Reading and Star Math through Renaissance Learning that are available. We'll be getting some new math software in place for our students that are in grades 1 through 6. There's different ways we're going to be doing online assessments through some other software that we have coming shortly. Okay. And Daryl, I think I got you a little screwed up. If you go up one slide, we'll deal with that one next. Sorry about that.
Don't worry.
Will my middle school student have to bring their own device into school?
So what's interesting is that I think we have many students throughout the district who are using a desktop computer at home, maybe their own Chromebook, maybe their own laptop. We're not planning on having students bring any personally owned devices to school at this time. So I think, as I've mentioned, 2,400 Chromebooks were ordered earlier this summer. Our hope is that they're going to be delivered soon. Again, the deadline for those to be shared with us ultimately has been postponed, the arrival time. But once they're here, they'll be part of our 6 through 12 one-to-one initiative. Currently, all of our high school students are one-to-one, and this will allow us to migrate down into 6, 7, and 8, and those middle school students will have their own one-to-one Chromebook as well. We're excited about this opportunity. And again, as we're fortunate in the sense that we pushed our one-to-one program at the high school when we did 3 years ago, because we had already had 4 grade levels who were ready to go with Chromebooks when the pandemic hit. This is just a matter of us now looking at getting those Chromebooks that are ordered, and every school district in the state is in the same kind of boat with this kind of delay, because there has been just some major issues associated with the production associated with Chromebooks, with computers and so forth. And they will eventually get here. It's just taking more time than I think most people thought. Again, the goal is to have every student 6 through 12 have their own Chromebook that they're going to have access to home and in school.
And so the parents know at home as well. We ordered those machines as soon as we could before the end of the fiscal year, and as soon as we were notified that the grant had been awarded, we ordered a second batch. So, and we thought we were on the front end of the order, but we're still waiting for delivery.
Yeah. And that's, and again, I do know that there are places that ordered many more than we did, but 24 Chromebooks is still an awful lot of Chromebooks. And what we have had to do is utilize our Chromebooks that we've had internally in our buildings to share with students that did not have access to technology at home. And again, I appreciate what our tech department has done to really facilitate that process over the past several months.
And you're right, 2,400 is a lot of Chromebooks.
It is.
Daryl, jump to slide 33 now.
Sure.
There you go, one more.
Oh, okay, I'm on slide 31.
Yeah, yep, we're going to jump forward 2 now.
Thank you.
Oh, there we go. Will students be using their devices on their in-person days? So if a student is hybrid and they're both remote and in-person, will they have to bring their device in on in-person days?
Yeah, so this accompanies that last question. At the high school, all the students will be expected in the same way they have been for the past few years. If they were issued a one-to-one Chromebook, they're expected to bring that Chromebook to school on a daily basis, charged, ready to go. At the middle school level, we're really going to be assessing this. Teachers are going to be looking at this when we start rolling through with the hybrid process. And then ultimately at the elementary level, if students need Chromebooks at the elementary level, if teachers are going to be using them in person, we would provide those in the building. So when we talk about in-person learning, again, one of the things that we're looking at is screen time and whether or not, we can actually limit the screen time while they're in school, because they are getting so much screen time now, and they'll continue to get a lot of screen time when they're home for remote. And that's either pure remote or that's during their remote learning days. So again, when we're in person, we're going to stress that in-person work, paper, pencil, books, traditional methodologies for teaching, instead of putting a laptop in front of an elementary student or a 7th grade, whatever it might be. So again, we're going to do our best to kind of follow that model so that when students are home, that's when they'd be spending more time looking at a screen.
Thank you. Daryl, we got a couple questions around routines now. Could you tell us what are the start and end times of each building?
Sure. So, again, our start and end times currently are based upon the same starting and closing times from last school year. So, if you went to Central Tree Middle School, school started at 8:15 and it closed at 2:45. That is going to continue for all of our schools from Central Tree down to the Early Childhood Center, as you can see on this chart. Again, that's as of today. Any modifications to the schedule associated with shortening days, different timeframes and so forth would all be shared with families beforehand.
And that would probably come out from the schools, I would imagine.
It would. And again, there were some questions as to, and that was one of the questions that I read last night, why can't all the schools start at the same time like they are now? So when we look at starting schools, it would be fantastic to have everyone on a similar schedule. So high school could start a little later, elementary could start a little earlier, but unfortunately, we're already using 49 buses. In order to do that, we'd have to really increase the number of buses quite a bit. Unfortunately, we just don't have the funds to do that. But this does still provide us the opportunity for those students to be in school a typical number of hours.
Thank you, Daryl. Daryl, our next slide, we had to rush through this a little bit yesterday, so maybe you could revisit it and give us some details here. How does school lunch purchasing work?
Yeah, so what's ultimately, I think, a benefit for students throughout the country is that meals are going to be free through this entire school year for any student in school, regardless of their free and reduced status. So as we kind of go through this process, any student may receive a free lunch. The only time when that, and again, the only thing that would require money, cash to pay for something, or using the My School Bucks card would be purchasing milk and also an a la carte snack item. So again, we have the a la carte snack items and the milk on top of it. So we want to ensure, and this is directly from the head of food service, Margaret Burton, the My School Bucks online prepayment program or paying by check of student accounts. If that can be something that's done, it would just make it a little easier in terms of staff and students being responsible for handling cash And we're doing everything in our power not to get them involved at the food level in terms of touching items and so forth. When we're talking about lunch in general, again, we're looking at bag lunches that we would make sure that we have the opportunity for there to be a grab and go lunch if that's the case. Maybe at the high school. In terms of items on a tray, all of that would be put out for students for them. They would not be allowed to choose. So if you've gone to a restaurant, there's a salad bar anywhere, that salad bar isn't there anymore. So it's the same thing that happens with cafeteria style lunches and breakfasts.
Thank you. Daryl, what routines will be in place for schools for bathroom breaks, mask breaks, snack breaks, those types of things?
Sure. Bathroom breaks, mask breaks, snack breaks, those are really specialized routines that'll happen building by building and, grade level by grade level, teachers by teachers, and ultimately teachers in building administration will help define those by building. But again, there will be time for bathroom breaks as there always are. There will be mandated times for mask breaks and also the opportunity for snack breaks, for schools. And again, what we're trying to do is just ensure that there's a level of consistency, but also you're trying to bring back a level of routine to schools. We had the opportunity to talk with a teacher at my management subcommittee meeting last night that teaches in another district. And she said that even at the high school level, after being in person for 10 days, they're still just getting used to the routine. The routine is what's going to take a while to get used to because it is so different. So even if you're a 17-year-old junior coming into the high school, the routine is going to look completely different. So those are the things that we have to take into consideration when we're thinking about all of these types of items in this new normal.
And schools will be pushing these routines and things out to parents shortly. That's true through their own document similar to what we've put out. Can you help us to understand that a little bit?
Yeah. So we have a broad document that was shared with families Monday evening. Each school will have its own defined document that's shared with families that will really specify what it would look like in a particular grade level, perhaps, or even at the school level. Specifications associated with how a class might run. So Mr. McCall's fourth grade class, this is how we do lunch, this is how we do snack, because again, it might be a little different even in an elementary school from one class to another, depending upon the time frame from which things happen.
Thanks, Daryl. Daryl, will all my kids from my family go on the same days?
Yeah, so that's something that people, again, many questions associated with the same cohort. We're going to do everything in our power to make sure that families are in the same cohort so that we're not putting a second grader in cohort A and a seventh grader in cohort B, and they're at home at different times and they're at school at different times. So we're doing everything in our power to do that. And again, not all siblings have the same last name. So as we come across that, we're also looking to see how we can, again, manage the cohorts in a way that allows us to put families together and they're in the same cohort.
Thank you. And I think we just want to alert people that there might be a situation in the high school. We talked a lot about these one-off courses earlier. If in fact a student said they absolutely wanted to have this course and there's only one section offered, the section might be offered at a certain time, which means the students might need to be in a certain cohort. That might be one exception to where it's a student choosing to remain in a course and we just can't make this work otherwise.
Exactly.
Next question is a multi-parter.
Yes.
How will students pass in the hallways, Daryl? How are they going to stay socially distanced? Is there going to be extra passing time? Are we going to stagger things? Are some hallways going to be one way?
Yeah, so those are all great questions in terms of the details associated with how an individual building is going to work. So again, students will pass in hallways. It's not going to be the typical all the kids out in the hallway at once and they're all going in the same direction and they're merging. We're really going to have, like you do on a road, you're going to be on the right side going down one way and on the right side coming back the other way. In order to ensure that students are traveling in the same way. We're not overlapping too much. We're also going to be having students socially distanced so they're not clustered together as they walk through the hallways. That's very, very important. In terms of stairwells, we do have some schools that are going to have one-way stairwells because again, they're just too narrow to fit students going up and down at the same time. So again, those will be individualized by school because every one of our schools is a little different. They weren't all built at the same time. We have some newer schools like Mount View that have quite a bit of space, and then we have some other schools that are a little tighter, like Dawson in certain areas where it gets a little more cramped down by that 5th grade hallway. So, we want to ensure that we have an individualized plan for each school, yet at the same time, there are consistent kind of protocols in place and procedures in place so that kids are able to travel safely in and out of bathrooms, out of the cafeteria, going to recess, anything like that.
Thank you. We've got a few logistics questions here as we wrap up our formal part of these questions.
Sure.
So, why not just tell me as a parent, hey, drop your kid off? Why are we still entertaining school buses?
Again, we're a regional school district. We're the largest regional school district in the Commonwealth, and we're bound by law to provide transportation to our students because, we've signed off on being a regional district. So no matter what, we have to offer it up to students that live outside of 2 miles from their buildings. With that being said, there's nothing that keeps a family from saying that they want to bring their children to school on their own. Again, we have that happen already at the high school. Many seniors drive to school. We'll allow juniors to drive to school this year as well. At the elementary levels, at the middle school levels, we have an awful lot of parents that drop their kids off anyway. So we assume that that's going to continue and probably increase if families don't want children on the buses.
Thank you, Daryl. Daryl, I got another bus question for you. So with me and my wife, our schedules differ depending on the day of the week. So some days I might be able to bring my kid in. Some days she might be able to pick him up. Do we have to ride the bus if we sign up for it or tell you we need it? Can we ride it some days but not others? Do we have to ride it both to school and from school every day?
So when we're talking about a bus, for example, our largest bus is able to hold 24 students now. It's no longer 72, so we're down to 24. Those are spaces that are coveted in the sense that we want to ensure that we're getting as many kids into school as possible with the current bus numbers that we have. So we would not say no to someone that says, hey, my child needs a bus, even if it's a couple of days a week. That's fine. We understand that. But if there is a way to, make sure that child's riding the bus as frequently as possible, that would be great. We understand that we're going to, families have situations where they might have to bring their child in because of daycare issues a couple mornings a week. Totally understand. And then the child has to take a bus home. The only thing parents need to realize is the pickup and drop off location has to be the same this year because that child will have a particular seat on a particular bus, and that's it. We can't save 2 seats for one child. So please remember that as you think about what's going to happen. If you're going hybrid with that AA model, so you're there on Monday, Tuesday, please understand that if they're at your house, that's in the morning and they get picked up there, they also have to get dropped off there in the afternoon.
Thank you. Daryl, I'm a student. Can I use my locker this year, or am I going to have to carry all my stuff around? How's this going to work?
Yeah, unfortunately, we're not going to be able to allow students to use lockers this year. There's just not enough space, for students to socially distance in an acceptable manner. The same thing goes with student desks. So a student that's in 2nd grade and they, would put all their stuff into their desk. That's not going to be allowed either because, primarily because those desks are going to be shared with 2 cohorts. Students at the high school, they'll be carrying a backpack around with them for the day. The good news, and Bob will attest to this, many of our textbooks are now going online. So they might not have to carry around 40 pounds worth of textbooks, which is not something that we would want them to do, but they'd have to have their Chromebook with them, and they'd have to have any other materials that they might need at the high school. At some of the other levels, we'll ensure that there are spaces for children to put their backpacks, to put their coats, because again, if you've been into an elementary school and you've seen a kindergarten classroom, you'll know that there's an entire wall, typically during the winter, of snow pants, boots, parkas, gloves, mittens, hats, scarves, on top of the stuff that comes into school for learning. So those are things that each elementary school is also working on in terms of maybe kids having their own bins that they're responsible for, and they just put them off to the side, but nothing will be put into a desk and nothing will be put into a locker.
Thank you, Daryl. And here's our last formal question that we have written up here. If I have additional questions about anything dealing with the reopening of schools, what's the best way to get my questions answered?
So again, I want to thank everyone for putting questions out there over the past 48 hours. The best way for us to kind of collect all this information is to write directly to feedback@wrsd.net. That is a direct link to an email address where all of those questions are collected. We're sorting those out and we're responding. So we'll be taking these responses that have been aligned with these, and we'll be putting those into that document where it will get posted. So again, I appreciate all of the questions that have come forth. We're doing our best to respond to them in a timely manner. And, ultimately we want to be able to make sure that we're putting answers out there for people so that they can really make informed decisions. So I think there were a couple of questions still that have come in, because we have a few minutes left. And if you don't mind, Bob, I'll read these.
Questions, Daryl, yeah?
Sure. So we are planning on having our children go hybrid. If we go out of state and then come back to quarantine for the 14 days, how will my children be taught during the 2 days that they are supposed to be in person? So again, during those quarantine days, and I think we talked a little bit about this on one of the earlier slides, the expectation would be that information that would be typical during an in-person day would be shared remotely with them. So whether or not that is going to be a synchronous, not in person, but a synchronous model that's followed, or assignments are shared and they're still working remotely, but on the same assignments. That's basically what the process will look like. And that also aligns where we talked about sick days where students are out and they can't actually be in school. So we know we're going to have a lot of families travel over Thanksgiving and also over December break. And, we want to ensure that we're able to bring kids back in safely and bring staff back in safely. And again, people need to remember this goes for adults as well as kids. So if that travel is occurring to a state that's a high risk state, the expectation is they will be quarantining or they'll have that test come back within 72 hours.
And I believe it was slide 7, Daryl, is where we talked about that and gave an answer.
Excellent. So, and again, a couple of these have come in. I'm just pulling them up. One of the questions, will the musical ensembles that are safe to have in person, such as orchestra, be scheduled in the morning so that they can meet in person? So there are really specific requirements, and I believe we have them in the plan, but yeah, they're in there. So DESE has really specific guidance around wind instruments, string instruments, chorus, and it's pretty restrictive in terms of what you can and cannot do. So, in terms of an overall question, the in-person meetings associated with these, this is really going to be something we'll be working with Principal Biendo and our head of the musical arts up at the high school, because again, we want to ensure that whatever we're doing, we're following the correct protocol. There's there's a much greater distance associated with anything with singing or playing an instrument. In fact, they really recommend that that's done outside. In a place like New England, you can do that for probably another week or two, and then we're going to be into weather that's just not acceptable for any type of outside activity.
And Daryl, for the parents, that's page 15 in our plan, our transition to hybrid plan, and it's under courses requiring additional safety measures.
Perfect. Thank you, Bob. And again, there is really specific guidance, and we have that guidance linked on our main website down at the bottom of the site on the right-hand side. That, again, those are the updates associated with DESE, because what they're doing is, as they kind of progress through the pandemic and updating guidelines, they're updating their guidance, sharing that with school districts, and then we're updating not only our own documents, but the document that they've updated as well. So please, if you have the opportunity, take a look at those as well, because many of the questions being asked actually can be answered there. I just have a couple of other ones. How will parents in homeschools communicate to ensure kids stay connected with their teachers and peers? So, I think that question goes back to students that are probably remote, and how will they stay connected? So when we're talking about the hybrid model, the great thing about the Wednesday is that that's the opportunity for those students to remain connected to each other in terms of having the class back together. So right now you have, a grade 8, maybe not grade 8, but a grade 5 classroom that's together. Well, they'll be split into 2 cohorts. They're not all going to be online at the same time or in person at the same time, with the exception of a Wednesday, when that will occur both synchronously and asynchronously. In terms of the remote teaching, if possible, they'll still be with the same teacher. That's how it will be working. If they're in an online class, it'll look a little different in terms of it being done with another group outside of WRSD. If they're with another teacher from WRSD, they will be in together with a cohort of students as well that may be from other schools throughout the district, but they would be together and they would have their own group of students in terms of building their own peer relationships with one another, and the opportunity to build with the classroom teacher.
And I'd just like to offer up, Daryl, we're still intending to try to run clubs and those types of things, and have opportunities for students to socialize that maybe are outside of a specific class. And those would still be open to anybody, whether the person chose hybrid or remote only pathway.
Yeah, and again, I think that's an important item to stress, Bob. So, thank you for doing that. One last question before we have to sign off.
Yep.
There's a question around the high school schedule and how, what an afternoon looks like. We had published a schedule a couple of weeks ago in reference to a sample of what the high school might look like in terms of a time frame. So starting school at that 7:35 time, and for in-person, and then ending by 11:30. And then starting back up again, I believe around 12:31. I don't have it right in front of me, but and then having time until the end of the day, 2 to 2:20, when students would still be responsible for being online. The morning would be in person. So if I were an A and it's Monday, I would be in person in the morning for probably 3 to 4, at least 3, if not 4 classes in the morning. I would then go home, have lunch. Then I would go back online, where I would have 2 more classes, and they would be remote. And again, the remote teaching could be synchronous and or asynchronous at the same time, based upon what the teacher's doing, what the class is, and so forth. So that kind of defines what the afternoon is. The afternoon's not going to be, okay, good, okay, I've done my 4 classes this morning. Now I get to just go home and do homework. They have 2 assigned classes in the afternoon that they're going to be responsible for attending. And not just, popping in and saying, hey, I'm here, I'll see you later, but participating in for those 2 periods at least.
Thank you, Daryl.
Yeah, well, I want to just, again, we appreciate all of the questions that have come in. Please feel free to continue to share them with us at feedback@wrsd.net. I want to thank Director Sklar, Director Keenan, Deputy Berlow, Administrator of Special Education Christine Smith, all of our principals, all of our teachers, our administrators, our support staff, custodian, cafeteria, secretarial. They've all done a fantastic job at just kind of, working in a new world, working in a new way. Again, this is new for everyone, and we so appreciate everyone's patience, questions, and understanding as we move forward with this. So with that, I want to thank you very much, and we will be communicating with you again next week. These town hall meetings will probably happen a little less frequently than twice a week, but I think this forum allows for us to be able to offer up the opportunity to answer some questions in person, be able to put some things out there for people to be able to hear and watch at different times, and then ultimately be able to just convey just how much we, really appreciate what you're doing as parents, and ultimately what our staff has been doing to work with our kids over the past, several weeks. So again, thank you very much. I appreciate it. And thank you, Bob and Chris and Brendan and Barry.
Thank you. We'll
Take
see you.
care.
Nice job, Daryl. Thank you.